for me. I've been miss you, know it. I'm alright now, but some days comes with nights where you're on my mind, and I feel like you still be mine. The way you got me, I like a overdrive. You've been my overdrive. Yeah, you're my overdrive. That's why I'm stuck inside like an overdrive. You've been my overdrive. The way you got me like you're my overdrive. Wake up my mind, I'm thinking too much. When up this on the side, wake up your mind. I keep in the morning. Wake up my mind, I'm doing too much. What you feeling inside? Wake up your mind. I don't really know she want me really. If she just play some games, yeah. I already know the rules, but I'm down for all the games. I know you the prize. Cause yeah, every time it crossed my mind, I was something sacrifice. All the time I have a life to be up by your side. Got me going on, and I really wanna know. You're the one that you know you gotta go. You're the one been giving love to my soul. Really though, I gotta know. Baby, tell me, do you know? You're the one that you know you gotta go. Yeah. The way you got me, I like a overdrive. You've been my overdrive. Yeah, you're my overdrive. That's why I'm stuck inside like an overdrive. You've been my overdrive. The way you got me like you're my overdrive. Got me going on, and I really wanna know. You're the one that you know you gotta go. You're the one been giving love to my soul. Really though, I gotta know. Baby, tell me, do you know? You're the one that you know you gotta go. Yeah. The way you got me, I like a all for me. I've been miss you, know it. I'm alright now, but some days comes with nights where you're on my mind, and I feel like you still be mine. The way you got me, I like a overdrive. You've been my overdrive. Yeah, you're my overdrive. That's why I'm stuck inside like an overdrive. You've been my overdrive. The way you got me like you're my overdrive. Wake up my mind, I'm thinking too much. When up this on the side, wake up your mind. I keep in the morning. Wake up my mind, I'm doing too much. What you feeling inside? Wake up your mind. I don't really know she want me really. If she just play some games, yeah. I already know the rules, but I'm down for all the games. I know you the prize. Cause yeah, every time it crossed my mind, I was something sacrifice. All the time I have a life to be up by your side. Got me going on, and I really wanna know. You're the one that you know you gotta go. You're the one been giving love to my soul. Really though, I gotta know. Baby, tell me, do you know? overdrive. You're in my overdrive. Yeah, you're my overdrive. That's why I'm stuck inside like the overdrive. You're in my overdrive. The way you got me high, like you're my overdrive.
Doing scratch, taking bad coat.
All for me, I will miss you, no way. I'm alright now, but some days comes with nights where you're on my mind, and I feel like you still be mine. The way you got me, I like a overdrive. You're in my overdrive. Yeah, you're my overdrive. That's why I'm stuck inside like a overdrive. You're in my overdrive. The way you got me high, like you're my overdrive. Wake up my mind, I'm thinking too much when I'm this on beside you. Wake up your mind, I keep thinking about it. Wake up my mind, I'm doing too much when she feeling inside it. Wake up your mind. I don't really know she want me really. If she just play some games, yeah. I really know the rules, but I'm not for the games. I know you the prize. Cause yeah, every time it crossed my mind, I was under sacrifice. All the time I've been alive to be up by your side. Got me going on, and I really wanna know. You're the one that you know you gotta go. You're the one been giving love to my soul. Really do, I gotta know. Baby, tell me, do you know? You're the one that you know you gotta go. Yeah. The way you got me, I like a overdrive. You're in my overdrive. Yeah, you're my overdrive. That's why I'm stuck inside like a overdrive. You're in my overdrive. The way you got me high, like you're my overdrive. Got me going on, and I really wanna know. You're the one that you know you gotta go. You're the one been giving love to my soul. Really do, I gotta know. Baby, tell me, do you know? You're the one that you know you gotta go. Yeah. The way you got me, I like a overdrive. You're in my overdrive. Yeah, you're my overdrive. That's why I'm stuck inside like the overdrive. You're in my overdrive. The way you got me high, like you're my overdrive.
Doing scratch, taking bad coat.
Bem, amigos da Bet Nacional, dizem que as bets são todas iguais, mas já está claro que não é bem assim. A lista do governo mostra que algumas marcas jogam limpo, enquanto outras não servem.
Matt, sua próxima fala é: cliente Nubank Mais tem cashback em todas as compras no crédito e assinatura Max inclusa sem custo adicional.
Wow. That's almost...
In the open, powerful feats of strength will be witnessed in gyms around the world. No matter your city, country, language, or ability, we will gather on the same starting line for 3 weeks of community, inspiration,
Last century.
O engraçado de viajar com as crianças é que a cada ano elas ficam maiores. Mas o hotel continua igual. Fique no Airbnb e tenha mais espaço.
Seja atendido por quem entende de contabilidade. Na Contabilizei você tem uma assessoria dedicada, com atendimento WhatsApp até às 22 horas. Abra seu CNPJ grátis.
Not recovered as of yet. NTSB did see that the priority right now is the recovery effort. Earlier this morning, officials announced that they had transitioned from what they deemed as a rescue mission to a recovery mission once they determined there were going to be no survivors from this disaster. That recovery mission is still underway. So as a result, NTSB is still waiting for those recovery operations to continue. Now, they do have investigators on the scene, but the bulk of this work will likely not swing into full action until the majority, if not all, of the victims have been recovered from the fuselage of the American Airlines plane, which, as we know from previous briefings from officials, actually broke into 3 different segments. So, you know, if you think back to previous, air disasters, think about the Miracle on the Hudson, Sully Sullenberger. This is not one plane sitting in the water. This is parts of 3 different parts of the fuselage, plus the wreckage of the helicopter. So essentially they have 4 different locations of wreckage that they're dealing with out in the water. And yes, it has warmed up over the last couple of days, but these conditions are arduous. Now, we were told by the director of the NTSB that the water itself will not affect the operational status of these black boxes, which he said, by the way, are not black, they are orange. They can be submersible, they can be in the water. I want to play for you two pieces of key sound here from the NTSB briefing in the last hour. This is Todd Inman, one of the NTSB officials and the board members, and Jennifer Holliday, who is the chair of the NTSB. Inman talking today about what NTSB views as its role, given the fact that there's a recovery operation still going. And then we're going to hear for Jennifer Holliday talking about the status of these very key pieces of information, these black boxes.
A loss of life in an aviation accident is very unusual in the United States. And our heartfelt sorrow goes out to everyone that's affected. It affects us, it affects everyone around us. There are a lot of people hurting today. We will help find out what happened. We will do it factually, and we will do it accurately.
We have not recovered the flight data recorders yet. We know they're there. They are underwater. This is not unusual for the NTSB. We have many times recovered flight data recorders in water. We have our lab right here that is about a mile from the NTSB, so it's not unusual. And once we get those, we'll be able to get those read and information from them to be able to provide further information to you.
All right, so to wrap up quickly here for you, one thing we do know, the parties to this investigation right now include, and this is
Donnelly reported in last night's briefing that we have a strong mutual aid agreement in our region, and those teams have worked together throughout the night in really tough and heartbreaking conditions, and we should all thank them for their heroic efforts. So we'll have several updates today. I'm first going to turn to the Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, and then you will hear directly from Chief John Donnelly with a situational update.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, Sean Duffy here, Secretary of Transportation. We wish we were gathering for different purposes today. I just want to let you know that the Department of Transportation, the FAA, along with the White House, President Trump, local, state, and federal partners, all working together on this incident in unison. I couldn't be prouder of this team that's been assembled, working tirelessly. Mayor, I want to thank you specifically for your work. A few details I'd like to give all of you. And some of you reported this, but last night, if you live in the D.C. area, you would know that this was a clear night last night. The helicopter was in a standard pattern. If you live in the D.C. area, you'll see helicopters up and down the river. This flight pattern is seen oftentimes when you live in D.C. This was a standard flight pattern last night as well. The American airline flight coming into land was in a standard flight pattern as it was coming into DCA. So this was not unusual with a military aircraft flying the river and aircraft landing at DCA. And again, if you live in the area, you'll see that frequently with those two aircraft working together.
That was Doug Ziegheib giving an update there. He's the chief executive of the Skating Club of Boston, saying that they lost 6 members of that club in the tragedy in DC. Let's bring in Sean Bell, who's here with us, a former military pilot, his expertise on what we think happened last night. Sean, great to have you with us, and good afternoon to you. So look, how did the passenger jet change its flight path last night?
Yeah, good afternoon, Kamali. I mean, first of all, our sympathy. 64 civilians, 3 military have perished in this, what looks like a very, very tragic accident. It's interesting that you look at the factors. The weather looks absolutely fine. There's no reason weather factors. It's happened in one of the most congested air control areas in the world, so there's massive control. Nobody moves without following a clear procedure, and it's all designed to stop these sort of accidents happening. So the real question is, why it happened and how it happened. What we do know is that the main runway here, it's not quite quite orientated properly, but that's the main northerly runway. So the American Airlines aircraft, as all of the others, would have been coming to land there and then taking off in this direction. Meanwhile, the Nighthawk would have been operating its way. Sorry, Black Hawk would have been operating its way down the Potomac here. Now, as the pilot of the Black Hawk, he'd have thought all of the civilian traffic is to the north of me, leaving or arriving. What happened just before this accident, though, was the American Airlines aircraft was on approach down here, was suddenly asked, could he take the shorter runway, which is the runway here? He said he could. So therefore, rather than going straight along that line, he diverted down to the south to get himself onto a lineup for that runway there. All of that, of course, would have put him on a direct collision course. Now, that sounds awful, but the whole purpose of procedural is that they may well be crossing. In fact, the two dots on the radar would have absolutely superimposed themselves, but they should have been height deconflicted, because that way you can guarantee they'll never hit each other. Now, an airline will eventually go through 200 feet, the height at which the helicopter was, but it'll do it really close to the runway, and the helicopter should be nowhere near that. So the fact remains is that somehow this helicopter, because the collision happened at 400 feet,
So why do you believe, Bernardo, that consciousness is the foundational substance of reality? Like, how do you know that?
It is the primary datum of existence, right? It's what we have before we begin theorizing and speculating and philosophizing. It's what we start from. We start from conscious state. I am an inveterate reductionist. I think we should always reduce the complex to the simple, always that we can. It's always preferred. And I think the ultimate step of reductionism is to reduce everything to the one pre-theoretical given of nature, right? So I think the best account of reality is to reduce, if we can, the spectacular richness, complexity, and variety of nature to one thing, and that thing being consciousness. Not my consciousness, not your consciousness, but consciousness as a type, a kind of existence. To mentation, so to say.
But how do you know? Like, how do you know that consciousness is the foundational element, that we're all connected through consciousness, that it's not that it's not intrinsic or emergent from physical processes?
I don't know precisely what Susan means by intrinsic. It could be a form of panpsychism. I think I'm very confident in saying that it's not emergent, because to say that consciousness is strongly emergent from a non-conscious substrate is to say precisely nothing. It's just a word. You're not giving that word any semantic grounding, any meaning. It's like saying consciousness is the involuntary wiggling of my left big toe. I can say that, but it doesn't mean anything. It's an arbitrary statement. So I'm very confident that emergentism is false, because there is nothing about physical quantities, physical parameters, in terms of which we could deduce the qualities of experience in principle. Panpsychism, I think, is not preferred, and I have a number of reasons for that. And I think idealism is preferred if we can make it work, if we can account for an obviously external, objective world, if we can account for the fact that we can predict the behavior of this external world and do science and construct theories that can be empirically falsified or not. If we can do that under idealism, in other words, by reducing everything to nature's only pre-theoretical given, I think that is preferred. Now, you ask me, how do I know? I know nothing. I know that I'm conscious, that's about it. How can I know anything else? We are monkeys running around a rock for the past 300,000 years at best, which is yesterday, in the time scale of existence. We know nothing other than the cogito, right? I think, therefore I exist. That's about it. Everything else is a kind of inference, but there are good inferences and bad inferences. And even bad inferences cannot be disproven. I cannot disprove the flying spaghetti monster. It may exist in a hyperdimension and it's moving the planets
But you don't
around
believe
the
in that
sun.
flying spaghetti monster because the evidence for it doesn't meet the threshold that we require.
Exactly. So I cannot refute it categorically, but I do not need to entertain it. In exactly the same vein, I think we do not need to entertain physicalism. We do not need to entertain panpsychism, all of which postulate theoretical entities that are not available to immediate empirical acquaintance. So it's from that perspective that I tell you, I don't know that idealism is right, but I think it is the best hypothesis on the table.
But is it a problem that there's not evidence for it? Like what
there is.
And Susan, I want to move to you, but what is the evidence that you have that is beyond the evidence you have for flying spaghetti monster? Which you don't believe
Yeah. If idealism is right, then physical states are secondary. They are appearances. They are what the mental states look like upon a measurement. They don't have standalone existence. They only arise upon observation because they are representations of observation. They are cognitive models, appearances. And lo and behold, that's exactly what physics has been showing for the past 50 years. These experiments got a Nobel Prize in 2022. It turns out that unless we entertain one of two theoretical fantasies for which there is absolutely zero empirical evidence, them being superdeterminism or Everettian multiverses, unless we entertain one of those fantasies, we have to acknowledge that physics has shown us empirically that physical properties can only be said to exist upon a measurement. In other words, physical properties are representational. They are appearances. The thing that is measured is itself not characterizable through physical properties. In other words, it might as well be mental, because that's the only thing we know of that to exist in which we cannot characterize through physical properties. What is the mass in kilograms of an emotion? What is the length in inches of a thought? So physics is pointing to idealism. Neuroscience can be said to be pointing to idealism as well. If you look at integrated information theory, its ontological implications, which are few, but the ones that there are entirely consistent with idealism. The idea that only things that exist to themselves can have causal effects. That's a pretty idealist idea. Also, the discovery that there are non-ordinary states of consciousness that entail much richer and intenser experience and yet less metabolic activity in the brain, such as psychedelics, also seem to line up with certain idealist ideas about personal consciousness being a dissociated process. There's plenty of empirical evidence that we can point to. It's just that people have to be open to it, but instead they prefer to entertain fantasies for which there is zero empirical evidence, like countless new universes popping up every infinitesimal fraction of a second out of nothing. I mean, anyway.
Susan, why the evidence and examples and narrative that Bernardo is telling about why he believes that consciousness is fundamental, why doesn't that resonate with you? What do you think he's missing there? Or what
he's
about
just done an exposition of just about all these complicated things, and I don't know where to begin. I was just wanting to jump in there about 10 times, and now I don't know where to jump.
Take your time. I'll sit back and I will listen.
I'd much rather we could actually have a discussion. But anyway, okay. Let's see. I share a lot of your ideas, well, practically all of them really, about the problems of the current views in the consciousness studies. I'm not going to say so much about physics. I'm, unlike you, not so versed in physics and maths and so on. My problems are with the whole idea that consciousness arises from matter. This is intrinsic to the hard problem. The way that Dave Chalmers coined the phrase back in 1994 was trying to understand how subjective experience arises from objective matter, and many other ways of putting it. I think that is a real problem. It leads to the hunt for the neural correlates of consciousness, which seems to imply, most of the ways you read it and most of the experiments done, that people are looking for somewhere in the brain or some process in the brain or some structure in the brain, which is responsible for giving rise to this extra thing called consciousness. And not surprisingly, they never find it. What they find is the neural correlates of this thought or that intention or this movement or whatever, but never consciousness itself. And that phrase to me is always a problem. Consciousness itself, kind of separate from everything else. And it also leads to ideas of which bits will produce consciousness, the idea that consciousness is generated, and it leads to problems with the question about why did we evolve consciousness and zombies and a whole lot of other things. I think where I differ with Bernardo, and he's sort of touched on this, I think you have Bernardo here, is the underlying explanation for order in the universe we see. Because I want to know why. I'm starting from a kind of representationalist point of view. If you're interested, I'll come back to what my own view is here. But to my mind, there has to be something underlying that. And maybe it's some obscure mathematical thing. There are interesting physicists working on ideas of that kind that would give rise to this. But if you say that everything is mental, then there are various ways you can take. And Bernardo, I think, you've taken a way that uses the analogy of alters in split personality situations, which is a very interesting way of going about it. But I'm interested, but I don't follow you there. I stick with the idea that we are ourselves are illusory. Or most of the ideas that consciousness studies seem to bring up about consciousness are wrong. But I can't follow you yet, would you say, into going the full idealist direction?
Why?
Well, for that reason. I do not buy, of all the things that I have read and heard of what you said, this idea about multiple personality doesn't ring true to me. Why should the world look this way? Why should it split up in that way? It doesn't provide answers. Now, does materialism provide answers? Well, at least ideas about gravity and interactions and so of atomic particles and so on. I'm not of the view that these things exist and we're actually seeing them as they are, but that there is this structure here that seems to make sense of why the physical world behaves the way it does. That seems to me you haven't got in your analytic idealism.
Reborn. Let's finish the fight.
I'll try to explain my view. I'm not trying to convince you of it. I'm trying to just make clear.
Trying to help me explain it, help me understand it, not to convince me, is the way I would think about it. I would like to understand it better. Whether I'm convinced or not, we shall see. Is that fair enough?
Okay, I'll do my best. Let's forget dissociation for the moment. If that's the contentious point, we can set it aside. Do you acknowledge that there is a clear separation between my inner states and the states of the external world, and between your inner states and the states of the external world? Can we acknowledge that this is the case?
Well, I thought you were saying there isn't any external world. I thought you were saying that there's only mental states. So I'm not sure what you're asking.
Yeah, I even wrote about a previous discussion we had in my latest book. I even named you, and I know that that's the difficulty because I have seen this before. So I'll try to be as explicit as possible. There is an external world. And it is not Bernardo Kastrup. It's not made of the mental contents of Bernardo Kastrup. It's not made of my perceptual qualities. It's not made of the reds I see. It's not made of the flavors I taste. The reds I see, the flavors I taste, these are internal mental states. There are external mental states that I do not have direct acquaintance with, that I can only perceive through the intermediation of sensing, of my sense organs. So under analytic idealism, there is an external world. And it would still be there if I were not here. It would still be there if none of us were here. And it does not change because of our wishes and morning affirmations and fantasies and likes and dislikes. It is what it is, independent and separate of us. But it too is made of mental states. Think of it like my thoughts right now. I'm having thoughts right now. Whether they are reducible or not, I'm having subjective states, mental states right now. I would still be having my thoughts, even if you were not there talking to me right now. Even if you didn't exist, there would still be my thoughts. You cannot access my thoughts directly. You can only observe my appearance to make inferences about what I might be thinking or how I might be feeling. But my thoughts are external to you. And yet my thoughts are subjective. Reducible or not, my thoughts are here. They are subjective. They are external to you. In exactly the same way, an analytic idealist would say, there is an external world. It doesn't depend on us. It would still be there if we were not here. But it is made of mental states. Mental states we cannot access directly. We can only represent those mental states through the screen of perception. So the physical world, what appears on the screen of perception, the things we see, touch, hear, feel, textures, the flavors, the sounds, the colors, these are cognitive representations of our own, which correlate with the mental states that constitute the external world. But I have no direct access to those mental states. All I have are the representations. So physicality is representational. I am a representationalist like you. But the real world behind the representations, that which is represented through my mental states, are also mental states. Mental states I'm not directly privy to, which I represent in the form of perception, but there is an external world. It just doesn't require that we create a new ontological category next to mental states. Mental states are what's given, right? It's the pre-theoretical given. All I'm saying is that, well, there is an external world, but it's made of the same type, the same ontic category of my inner mental states. It's not made of my inner mental states, but it's of the same type as my inner mental states. And what separates me from the world is a dissociative boundary. But okay, forget about that. Whatever separates me from the external world, there is a separation between my mental states and the external mental states that constitute the world. They are mental, and physicality emerges once we observe those states. They impinge on our sense organs, they impinge on our altar, if you will, and then we cognitively represent them, like an airplane dashboard represents the results of the airplane's measurements done through the airplane's sensors. The physical world is that dashboard representation for me. But the thing which is sensed, the thing which is measured, is really out there. It's just mental. It's not physical, because physicality is the dashboard, and the world is not the dashboard. But it's really there. It's really external. It's real. Does not depend on me and doesn't care about my morning affirmations.
I'm not sure what you have really added there by saying that it's mental. You're trying to get away from the obvious gap between physical material as materialists have it. But you've just said, I'm just going to call it mental. But if it's inaccessible, then I'm not sure how this works. You said you don't want to talk about the dissociative boundaries, so I'll stick with the question of why it has the structure it does, because the way we can introspect and find the way our own thoughts work, you're saying that's all we can have, but we have to hypothesize about the kind of machinery that makes that. I mean, I'm particularly interested in predictive processing and our brains as prediction machines. Why are brains like that? If it's all made of mental, I don't know how it helps at all. So you're saying we're both representationalists. Then I want to ask about, in your view, where do these representations come from? What is the substrate in which that constructs those representations? You're just going to say that's mental, but I'm not sure what you're really adding or why you're explaining anything by calling it mental.
I'm removing unnecessary inferences that lead to problems, such as the hard problem of consciousness. If we unnecessarily postulate that there is a new category of existence, which is not mental, whatever it is, it's not mental, and then we say, and the mental arises from it, now we have an explanatory gap, and the whole thing goes to hell because it's an impossible situation. So by removing that unnecessary baggage that leads to insoluble problems, we end up in a situation where things make sense. Let me be very explicit about it. My mental states, for whatever reason, are separated from the mental states of the world. I think it's because it's dissociation, and dissociation happened because it could happen, and given enough time, everything that can happen in nature is bound to happen. And guess what? Dissociation happened. We call it life. We call it abiogenesis. That's what it looks like when I represent it, biology. The states of the world impinge on my inner states. That impingement provides me with information about the world, so evolution has zeroed into amplifying that impingement, and that's our sensory organs, that's perception. Now, is perception a problem under idealism? Not at all. We have mental states on one hand, mental states on the other, and external mental states causally impinge on internal mental states, thereby modulating them. That's causation from mental to mental. And it's trivial. My thoughts impinge on my emotions and modulate my emotions every day. And the other way around. My emotions impinge on my thoughts and modulate my thoughts every day. Negative emotion, negative thought.
Well, what's the boundary here? You've implied there a very clear boundary between the internal ones and the external ones.
Yeah.
So what is making that boundary? I think we have to come to this dissociation problem. At least you may not go that way, but you talk very clearly about internal things you can access or are accessing, and these external ones which you still call mental. What makes that boundary if it isn't to be that is a body and has these properties and so on?
I think the external surface of the body is what the boundary looks like. It's what the boundary looks like: your skin, your retina, your eardrums, the inner lining of your digestive tract. How did it happen? Why did it happen? I personally, I don't think it's productive to ask whys of nature. I think in nature, things that can happen. And at some point, a dissociative process happened that could reproduce, that could spin out other dissociative processes. And then all the rules of natural selection kick in. And guess what? That's how we emerged. Because once there was a dissociation that could spin out other dissociations. And of course, we are descendants of that, and not of the ones that couldn't spin out other dissociations. The whole process kicks in. Now, how did dissociation happen? Because it could happen. I think what we call the physical world is a representation of the real world, which is mental. But that doesn't make our understanding of physics invalid. We understand the world through the physical representation. So the laws of physics still hold. The laws of chemistry still hold. They represent what we could call a dissociation in and of itself. And at one point, it did happen. And here we are. It's just as simple as that. Now, I think we tend, some idealists and people who are dabbling in idealism, they tend to anthropomorphize the external mental states too much. I see the external mental states as states that unfold according to their own inherent dispositions. In psychological language, you could call it archetypes. In other words, they do what they do because they are what they are, and that is pretty much automatic. They have inherent properties that govern the way they interact with one another and how the whole thing evolves along the arrow of time. You could even call it mechanistic. I mean, you're a psychologist. You know the human mind is more mechanistic than most lay people would think. We are more predictable than most lay people would think. I think the external world is not a mind that deliberates, that that makes plans or has goals. It unfolds instinctively. Well, it's certainly not the Abrahamic God. I think the Hindu God Brahman, it comes pretty close because they don't add these extra anthropocentric properties to Brahman. It's just a field of subjectivity. I'm pretty comfortable with that. I mean, I don't need to use the G word, but some people like to, and I try to be friendly to that. But it's not something that it's outside nature and deliberating and has a plan and passes value judgments. No, it's a system, and it has inherent properties, and it does what it does because it is what it is, and it does so very spontaneously. Cause will lead to effect, and if you repeat the cause under the same circumstances, it will lead to the same effect, and it's predictable. And our minds have become less predictable because we evolved under the constraints of a planetary ecosystem with limited resources, and we had to evolve strategies in order to respond to environmental threats and opportunities. So our mind is more reactive. And entails higher level mental functions that were useful for evolution. We can plan, we can deliberate, we can pass value judgments. All this stuff has evolved and made our minds less predictable because of the forces of natural selection. But I don't think these higher level mental functions are inherent in the mental fabric of reality. And that's why physics works. Because, the mental states that constitute the inanimate world are archetypally driven. And therefore, they are predictable. They have inherent dispositions, and you can predict how they will behave given the circumstances around it. And that's why physics works. I don't see a contradiction between that and saying those external states are mental.
I'm still struggling with... You've got away from the hard problem by being a monist of a sort. And I've always described myself, people have called me a materialist, drives me putty, because I've always described myself as a neutral monist. I reject dualism, and I really don't know what this mon is, this one, whatever. So you are, I'm very happy to see having a really strong and powerful attempt to provide a monist view.
Monism.
A monism, yeah. But I want to come back to not back to the hard problem, but to what we mean by consciousness. This is really where we were starting from. And in my view, if we go back to Nagel, if you think about the history of consciousness studies, not going back centuries, not even going back to William James and Helmholtz and such like brilliant people then, but just going back to the 1990s and the start of the mess I believe we've got in. And I think you and I would agree that consciousness studies is in a right mess with loads and loads of theories. I love the attempts to compare one with the other, and then they don't come up with any answer, which doesn't surprise me. But so I want to go back to Nagel, where most people have started from. So they start from the question, what is it like to be a bat? Now, I think what's good about what Nagel said there is to home in on what it is like to be. Because that's, here I am, feeling conscious. Oh, gosh, I've been so hard thinking about what we're talking about. I wasn't really me here. Now I've asked the magic question, am I conscious now? And poof, I seem to be here. This is a digression. But going back to what is it like to be, so far so good. But then when you add what is it like to be a bat, you have jumped across from the sense of what it's like to a physical object in a supposed physical world. So you inevitably are stuck with a hard problem. So what I am trying to play with, and the same as you, I don't want to convince you this is right, but I'd love to be able to discuss with you more where this goes, is to say there's nothing it's like to be a bat. There is only something it's like to be the bat's representation of a bat, or the bat's representation of what it's like flying through the world. And why is this a good idea, to my mind? Because if you ask what is it like to be a bat's representation of itself now, the answer is it's like whatever the representation says it's like, because that's what representations are. So that's my way of avoiding. I haven't solved the hard problem. I've simply said we never should have got into the hard problem in the first place. So I would love your response to that, because I think it leads to a very different way of doing consciousness studies, of the experiments that we should do and so on. And I'm interested in working out where this goes. And I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Just for the sake of the audience, we have this running discussion already in the background for a while. So I'll say things that you already know because we have had this discussion. But for the sake of the audience, I will repeat. Because you are not a materialist, by doing this, you get rid of the hard problem. I agree with you. I don't think doing this saves the materialist from the hard problem.
No.
I am with you. I know that you believe that mind tends to deceive itself. You know that I agree with you. I am known for saying that the mind's first directive is to deceive itself. So I go even further than you. I think it's really a fundamental property of mind that it seeks actively to deceive itself. It's not even something that is casual or circumstantial or it's dispositional, it's archetypal. So I can't defend that, but that's what I believe. Huh?
Not just an accident or byproduct. It's central.
Yeah, I think it's central. It's part of the inherent properties of mind. This attempt to deceive itself. It's what creates the world, in a sense. Creates the personal self, which is a delusion right there. Right, there is no reason for us to think that there is such a thing as a true personal agent that remains the same across time, that it is just not there. And the more you look, the more you don't find it. Now, I am completely comfortable with the idea that what is it like to be a bat is what it is like to be the model of the bat, and that there is nothing it is like to fundamentally be a bat, because the bat isn't even there, the person isn't even there. What are we talking about? What is it like to be something that doesn't exist? It's always what is it like to be a model.
Yes.
And that model is a conscious model, it's a mental model. I'm totally comfortable with that. The reason I think this doesn't save the materialist is that if you are a materialist or an illusionist or an eliminativist, the argument line that started with Dennett in 91 goes like this. There's only neuroactivity. That's all there is. Why doesn't it feel to us like we are neuroactivity? Why does our sense of being, our model of ourselves, feel so different than neurons firing? Well, it's because what we experience is a model of ourselves, and that model is a kind of digest of what is really going on, and that digest feels different than neuroactivity. That's then its attempt as a materialist to get rid of the hard problem. I think it doesn't work because premise one is there is only neuroactivity, so that model of the self can only be neuroactivity. So you only postpone the problem, because why doesn't the model of the self then feels like neuroactivity? Well, we need a meta model. But that meta model can only be made of neuroactivity, because that's your first premise. That's all there is. So why doesn't the meta model feel like neuroactivity? So you can keep on playing that meta problem forever, postponing the problem like Keith Frankish does. But it just postpones it. It doesn't solve anything. In your case, it helps because you are not a materialist. You are more. You had a word the other day by email that I thought was a great word. Your basic premise is that the mind is always deceiving itself, so it creates models of itself.
Delusionist.
I'm completely but you are not an eliminativist illusionist.
No,
You're a delusionist. Something like that. I'm comfortable with that. I think what it is like to be Bernardo is a delusion. There is no Bernardo. There is a fluid, moving pattern of mental states that has changed a gazillion times since the day I was born. There is no such a thing as Bernardo, so there cannot be anything it is like to be a Bernardo that doesn't exist. There can only be a model of Bernardo, and that model remains more or less stable. It's a narrative, I tell myself. I'm totally comfortable with that because it's entirely compatible with idealism. In idealism, there are only mental states. Those mental states can come together in the form of a self-delusive model. What is important is that idealism maintains the space for the delusion to exist. Even if everything's an illusion, everything's a delusion, we still experience the illusions and the delusions. And idealism makes room available for that, which it doesn't for the eliminativist or the illusionist in the materialist sense. Because if you say consciousness is an illusion, well, it backfires immediately because the illusion is experienced. So there has to be a consciousness to experience the illusion of consciousness. If everything is an illusion,